of India and is supported by Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, and Niti Aayog. I'm your host for the session, Devendra Nagle from IMAI. We have an interesting conversation on transformative and participative governance through digital platforms. Before we start, we would like to thank our digital financial management partner, EaseBus, conversational messaging partner, GupShup, session partners, GoQuick, gold partners, Manorama Online, Blink Digital, and Yellow.ai, and silver partner, ShareChat. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Anand Kumar Bajaj, founder and CEO PayNearby, in conversation with Mr. Suresh Sethi, Managing Director and CEO, Protean eGov Technologies. I request all delegates to keep posting their questions in the chat box, and the panel will try to address them towards the end of the session. Over to you, Mr. Anand and Mr. Suresh.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Suresh, for joining us for this fireside chat.
Thank you, Anand.
To introduce you, it would be like indeed showing lamp to the sun. But let me give it a shot without missing the fact that your 3 decades of experience in payment space, in banking space with Citibank and Yes Bank, and then after the M-Pesa MD CEO position that you drove along before being invited as only 3 names that I remember who have been invited by government, one being Nandan, Jaykumar, and then you as additional secretary to the government of India in the role of the founding MD CEO of India Post Payment Bank. So it's indeed an honor to invite you to this forum and have this conversation at your eGov role, in your current role as the MD and CEO of Potian, the NSDL eGov portal erstwhile. So Suresh, without much ado, I hear about this platform and I'm really thrilled and excited that a person like you is at the helm to drive another public-private partnership. And I want to hear this story about Potian. What's in the name and why you chose this and what's this gonna do? So please help us understand this, please.
So thanks, Anand. Thanks for your kind words. And yeah, Protean is an interesting story to begin with. At this juncture, as we look around, and especially with the last 2 years in the pandemic scenario, we are seeing that across the industry, there has been significant disruption. As a result, digital transformation has again played a big role. Organizations have adapted to change. Consumers have shown huge amount of agility in changing behavior and working against new business models. Whether we see our entire delivery industry today, whether we see the adoption of digital payments. So it's a time for quick change. What otherwise took years and months to happen is now happening in days and weeks. So what triggered us was the thought that as we look at all the change happening there, NSDL e-governance has been at the core of providing citizen-centric services for the last 25 years plus, having been set up as a market infrastructure institution as a depository, and then going on to create significant interventions in the area of tax modernization or national pension systems, or building solutions on the back of the Aadhaar stack. We clearly felt it was a time to pivot. And as we look forward, we wanted to represent something which is in line with change as we were discussing at the speed of thought, which is what is happening today. So we chose a name that represented all of that. Interestingly, Protean is a word in the English dictionary, and it means all of what I've said, be it change, be it multifaceted, be it versatile. So we wanted to represent that as we get into new areas of e-governance, as we look beyond not just creating enabling infrastructure in the e-governance space, but also enable the ecosystem, and then even provide B2C business models where we enable the end consumers. So that has been behind the change. So
Fantastic.
Thanks for asking that question.
Yeah, and multifaceted and multidimensional. This sounds like a synonym to Suresh Sethi as well. And who better a person than you to drive this, Suresh? You used the word quick change, and that is very interesting, with the governance meaning to a common man comes out as government. And when the government, the Prime Minister said less government, more governance. in his opening remarks in the earlier mandate that he drove. How do you think that this heavy-duty machinery behind the scene and with a nimble-footed platform that you are creating would go hand in hand with this quick change in mind and adaptability of people on one hand, and the whole paraphernalia, I will not call it a drag, but the heavy-duty program that you would want to consolidate and drive? So how do you see this balancing out?
Another very interesting question, because when we talk about platforms today, we are no longer talking about monolithic operator-driven platforms. When you are creating public digital infrastructure at scale, I think for us the best example has been what the work that was done on the national identity system, Aadhaar. If you look at Aadhaar as a fundamental core, and on that, the ability to create payment and settlement systems, the ability to enable financial inclusion by enabling multiple entities to come and play on it, that I think has been one of the, call it like a case study or a role model, which India has taken and built. And organizations like NPCI, which have then come in and created the infrastructure level payment and settlement systems, in which both the banks at one end and big tech at the other end have been able to build successful business models and create solutions which have enabled the last mile citizen to participate in a structured financial economy. So when we look at systems like these, the point comes that going forward, we do not see monolithic platforms being owned by one entity being established and doing the entire work. It will be more community-driven, community-centric, open platforms. At the heart of it, we now talk about open digital ecosystems. And these open digital ecosystems will be built by the community, owned by the community, and will be governed by the community. So at the back of governance lies the fact that you are no longer talking about operator-driven, you are talking about facilitator-driven platforms, which effectively can be governed by the community itself. And there are some very interesting examples as we see today. There is an amazing convergence of government policy and thinking on these lines. There are the right regulatory enablers, and I would say technology has evolved at the right time to be able to create that. And I will give you three sectoral examples where it applies beautifully. Today, like we have the payment and settlement systems, and we have the UPI. We are similarly talking about health, education, and agri being three areas where the government policy is today talking about creating interoperable, open public infrastructure on which multiple players can come and host their platforms, and these platforms can be interoperable and can talk to each other.
Wonderful. That's an interesting thought process, Suresh. It's a huge collaboration, built, owned, and governed by community, and a community-centric platform, which is not monolithic. And I see your fair examples of the big tech collaborating with the bank and on the platform of NPCI. You mentioned about the two things, if you could address. Are there examples world over of similar self-governance platforms? And in India, I do reckon Umesh Jain doing a fair shot of work on AasPaas, which was a local governance something. If you could touch A, that, and B, if do you see a possibility of like a banking correspondent network for payments or merchant network for digital payments? Is there an opportunity for health network and insurance network in similar form on the platform like Portia? And so example, if you may share some thoughts on similar leads elsewhere in the world.
So, Anand, if you look at it, when I take world examples, some of the most successful examples of open platforms are two very day-to-day, sort of platforms we use. One is in the area of internet. So today, as we talk about evolving from Web 2 to Web 3, it is all about community created and community developed nodes on which the platforms are existing. But today, internet does provide you the ability of universal access. Whether you are hosting information or you want to interact with one another, you are actually oblivious to what is running below it. And there are no walls as such. It's not a walled garden. I can host information and you can view it. And we need not even be on the same platform or the same means of accessing the information. Similarly, email is another amazing example. So these are some of the examples which have become mundane, which are our day-to-day life as we see it. But extending the same thought, now what we see today, UPI as a platform is today connecting multiple bank accounts. And your ability to establish an address or a handle, you can do it through multiple applications. You are no longer restricted to access that capability and establish access into the UPI ecosystem using any one particular application. So there are multiple applications which are sitting on top of what I would say a digital common. And referring to examples around whether we take it health or we take education, or the other example very clearly is the work which is being done in the area of open marketplaces, which is under the ambit of ONDC, right?
Yeah.
So here what we are talking about, it's talking about establishing open protocols. So there are standards which will be established. So just like you have the ability to connect party A with party B without being dependent on an operator-driven application or platform, you are creating a common infrastructure. Anybody who logs into this infrastructure becomes discoverable. So if there is a seller who wants to sell goods, the moment they adopt, for example, the ONDC protocols, and they put the same technology across their system, they are discoverable to anybody on the other side who's a consumer. And consumer, again, need not be dependent on one app. Any application which is today able to plug into this open protocol then has the ability to connect the consumer and to discover the services getting delivered at the other side. So your reference to merchant ecosystems getting created, we are seeing a very similar thing happening in the area of health. Just like we have UPI, we are talking about now universal health interface. And the thinking behind, if you see, it's very similar. You and I both being part of the financial services industry, we very clearly are very familiar with the terminology that is today being used in the account aggregator ecosystem, which is again a consent framework for sharing my own data with a party to access financial services, for example, a loan. So there are financial information providers, financial information users, and each one of them is holding its own sort of, separate ecosystems. And account aggregator is today giving an individual the capability to move his data from his provider institution to the user institution to secure a loan, for example. If I want to give my salary statement from my bank and give it to another bank which is going to, or where I'm interested in getting a loan from, the account aggregator today enables that journey. We are seeing a very similar thing in the area of health. And I was talking about converging policy, where we look at the NDHM, the National Health Digital Mission, and the National Health Stack Architecture. We are talking about, again, financial health information providers and users. So what you are doing is you are giving standard protocols in between. And if we, let's say, create a registry or a repository in one hospital where patient data can become digitized or maintained in an electronic format. And if that same patient goes to another hospital and wants to give the consent to the first hospital to share his or her reports, you are again enabling that journey. So what you are really looking at, rather than one person creating an infrastructure for the entire country, which is very difficult to do, you are actually about creating standard protocols and standard interfaces. And various parties, as long as they adopt those standards, are able to become interoperable and talk to each other. We have great examples like DigiLocker and all already existing, where you can host data on a cloud and you can access that data from anywhere, anytime. Similarly, we are seeing similar such examples being created in various areas of the industry today.
Absolutely. So the keyword being the common digital infra that you mentioned for public good, of course, is an outcome, open platform, interoperable that you say. It's more a protocol creation to begin with. because Sahmati and all other similar modules are first a protocol. So is the backend, the OCN, the ONDC, and then on top of it, the participants, the market players would come along and ride along. And that reminds me, Suresh, of a very wonderful thing. As you were speaking, in US, I don't remember the name of the pharma company. It was driven out of patent in a year or two time, that time. And packaging partner of that company came up with an idea to create dispensers which would dispense that particular medicine, and it could also have the prescription from the doctor. It could go and feed into a pharmacy which would deliver. It could feed in the lab reports, and the reports would be available to an insurer to price the premium for this consumer. And all of it driven by the packaging company, which was scared of going out of business because their main provider partner pharmacy was going out of business. And look who paid for this with this open infrastructure multi-consumption. The insurance company paid for this whole platform to build.
Sure.
And I see that there would be similar heavy duty players required to come along and fund the program. But not to miss the point, Suresh, is this going to be a B2B or B2C if it is for public consumption? And more important, will it be as close user engagement like Umang built by Ministry of Electronics given only to Common Service Center? Otherwise, it could have been given to any shop and establishment license holder ultimately. So it could be as granularized, as federated, as democratized versus. So what is your thought process on Potian? Is it going to be restrictive, participative, and to only B2B, or it's to consumer also open and available to come and gain out of it?
See, from our perspective, Anand, what we are doing is we are pivoting into saying that we want to be working and building on these open protocols. These are open source communities. And we want to create the capability of having people, teams who understand and who contribute to these communities. And that is where we are today operating in all the areas, whether it's health or education or agri. But when you look at open protocols being established, and then on top of it, you are creating, open source communities, it becomes very critical that the governance of the open layer, because you are now no longer working in an operator-driven model. It is the community which is managing. It is the management, the coordination, the incentivization and adoption, which becomes very critical at the core of it. Because the moment platforms are open, there is no single person driving adoption over there. And when you create an open system like this, it becomes very essential that there are a few things I would like to call out, and I think you just mentioned that as a facilitation or a governance entity at the center of these open protocols, you need importantly things like transparency and efficiency of the network itself. It is very important that the network be inclusive and non-preferential, because that is what will enable adoption. There has to be in any federated network the ability for people to qualify and be part of it. So it should be equally available, equal opportunity to everybody. The role being played by the central entity is more, or the governing entity, which could be a governing community, will be more in the form of a facilitator rather than a regulator. And there is the important part about network policies being there. And in today's world, as we talk about network policies, we are no longer talking about, a piece of paper which is sitting in somebody's desk and that is the rules and regulations. In a digital platform, it becomes critical that you have machine readable policies which get embedded into the ecosystem itself. And that is where some of very cutting edge work we see being done in the area of tokenized governance, where you're actually using tokens to vote for policies and make things happen. And last but not the least, the governance community has the role to ensure the network health. Well, ultimately, it is again data. It is data of consumers. It is data of corporates, which is getting exchanged, which is getting hosted, where registries are getting created. So the efficiency of the platform, the security of the platform, the reliability of the platform becomes a core role of the facilitating community. And grievance redressal goes without saying, which I said at the beginning also. That is a very important role that needs to be played. And again, This is not about creating an ombudsman, but it is about creating the network in a way where you can, within the laws of the land, be able to create ways of addressing any grievances and making the platform help that do in an automated and seamless manner without any human intervention, if possible.
Oh, that's fantastic. And starting with the grievance redressal in a self-governance platform, it's a great way to start. It's really wonderful to hear that. And when you say, Suresh, since we have some more time, wanted to check that equal opportunity to everyone when we say, does these large platform formats um, become property of the initial few biggies, and our youngsters in the, so to say, the startups, the smaller intent oriented people, they easy to access them? The governance is being co-created by a few large biggies in the community mostly, but how does that available to everyone gets assured?
I think, Anand, you have a good point, and I think
And
one
for
of
a
the
platform, Suresh, when you start with governance, there is an equal participation that I seek from small to big, all. Like
sure.
RBI ensured when they came up with Sandbox, when they came up with Innovation Hub, when they came up with other formats, all kind of participations were invited. So how does that get ensured, Suresh?
So I think a good example to take is some of the recent work which has happened in the area of ONDC, the Online Network for Digital Commerce. Uh, Again, if you see one area is at the code level, where we are simply talking protocols. So it's adoption of an open source code, and anybody and everybody is free to come and contribute into development of that code. So when you're talking about use cases getting created, and their use cases can range from anything, right? When you look at markets, and you are yourself a premier player in the area of digital marketplaces and fabulous job which PayNearby has done. But over here we are really talking about players coming in, they are doing their own use cases, maybe in the area of logistics, maybe in the area of ordering, maybe in the area of multilingual capability getting created, ability to manage inventory. So there are various examples, and I'm sure as a practitioner you would come up with 10 more. But the point being that you are giving everybody equal opportunity because you are working on an open source protocol. So there is no sort of restriction or walled garden over here. That is one part. What we are talking about at the core of it is a enabling of a digital infrastructure, or a digital common, as I called it. Now that is built on open protocol, so anybody can plug in as long as they establish the right interfaces. So these are open APIs, open standards. You adopt those and you can plug into the platform. Now, the whole idea of doing this is that the discovery becomes irrelevant in this case, because the entire platform structure is driven in a way. And when we look at, again, ONDC, it's about inclusivity. It's about giving open market access to everybody. So if there are consumers at the other end, I, as a merchant, don't need to worry about creating even consumer-facing apps and getting the consumers to onboard on my app and discover my goods. Anybody on the other side, as long as there are multiple applications which are plugged into these networks, give you the ability to then discover all the merchants who are on the other side. So I think inclusivity and equal opportunity are pretty much at the core of this entire infrastructure or ecosystem, or open digital ecosystems as we call them. And that is a pretty much a principle on which they are built.
Very good. That basically calls out there would be no net worth requirement as a mandate for people who would like to participate here to contribute to begin with. Unlike many more other platforms that to be on the table, you have to have a table stake. That's a great start, Suresh. Suresh, I see the keywords as interoperable, open platform, common digital infra for public good, federated protocol, the digital common. I've made note of these, Suresh. These are wonderful terminologies, and I see that it actually brings out a huge opportunity for this whole open architecture for larger public good. Do you see a possibility of a department, a ministry being created out of it? I know it's out of line and out of time, but do you see a need of a national level ministry to drive such collaborations? Because there have been discussions in the past about insurance, lending, a bank, or investment, SEBI collaborating and creating a common platform on governance. With this, do you see this harbinger augur a possibility of nothing else but a seriousness at the government level? Your views, and then we can.
So I think in these areas, Anand, actually, if you see, and that is why I referred to earlier, there has been serious government policy work which has already happened in a lot of these areas. So when you take the health area, you're talking about a national policy. The ABDM, which is there, Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, which today actually lays out the entire health digital vision for universal health access. So that actually creates the framework. Similarly, in education, skilling, we are seeing NDR playing as the underlying framework on which this entire construct and thought process resides. And you are seeing similar examples elsewhere. So yes, government policy is very important. It is today, as we see it, being driven by various relevant ministries as such. But what is getting created out there is no longer something which is owned by one player or owned by two players, but you're actually taking leverage on open source communities and open source platforms and protocols and building something where everybody can come in and participate, either as a network participant, which means I'm actually a provider of goods or services or a consumer of goods and services. I'm either a hospital itself or I'm a patient, right? And the other thing could be all the other enabling players. I could be a player who's managing data. I could be a player who's managing embedding finance into it. E-rupee, as you and I were discussing only recently,
right?
The whole idea about tokenized governance, where you want to give subsidy for a particular purpose. So all these are becoming as embedded layers. So some of the work which has already been done, that is feeding into it, because again, these are open, systems into which I think we've used the word open. Maybe there's a count we can do at the end of the meeting to see how many times we called it out. But I think that remains at the crux of the entire structure.
Absolutely. And I see that Nandan saying that regulation will follow innovation. And if this platform is and will be created very well, I'm sure there would be some good regulation that will come around it. Time for a couple of quick questions, Suresh, if I may invite this question on what are your thoughts on data privacy concerns of citizens? So I'm sure there would be a GDPR equivalent framework here with consent architecture. So we will pass that for now. Governance in a decentralized world. Is there a question? I don't see about a question, but yes, this is interesting. What are some of the services that are expected to be transformed through digital platforms in next 3 to 5 years? Specifically, you mentioned of health, etc., but can you deep dive?
I think health is a very good example, because we've looked at various examples coming out in that space, whether it is electronic medical records or whether it is patient health records. Now, digitization of those records and the ability to share it is going to be very critical. And that is one of the pillars of the national health stack architecture, and enabling multiple players to be able to store, host that data and give the consumer the ability to share their data in a digitally verifiable and controlled manner. That is one interesting use case, and we were already seeing manifestations of that in the industry, if you may. Other area which Anand, we are also looking at, and there is naturally some work going on in that space, is in the area of skilling. Now, today we know for a fact that one of the biggest challenges remains that as an individual, if I have to go and give my credentials, in all cases, my credentials are not digitized. Now, take the simple example of a COVID certificate, which we are getting for our vaccination. Now, you can be anywhere in the world. It is built on international standards of verification, and you can actually get the authenticity of the certificate that is getting issued. Now, if you take the same example to education, as an individual, your life cycle starts from your schooling, your higher education, to you getting a job somewhere, to you doing a skilling course somewhere. So proof of work, proof of education. It can even be a proof of reputation. It applies to institutes and it applies to individuals. Whether it is institutional or individual, if you are able to digitally credential this, and these credentials can be verifiable, you can unlock a lot of value. And today,
Wonderful.
whether it is something as simple as a corporate hiring somebody, and today you have to actually ask the people, give us proof that you studied somewhere, give us proof that you worked somewhere. So if that can all be digitized and that information can be available, you're removing a lot of friction in it. So trust becomes a very critical element. And if you take a same example, what's the biggest challenge in financial inclusion? We didn't have a national identity. The moment Aadhaar came in and you were able to identify
Absolutely.
people digitally, and that data was freely available and you can provide an identity, it did wonders. When we look at the Jan Dhan Yojana and today the number of people who are holding accounts and they are part of the
Massive.
formal financial economy, it was all about trust, my ability to, in a way, share my identity and let it be verified. I can take the similar example in the area of education and skilling. I can give proof of work, proof of skill. Once you've done that, then it's all about discovery. And that is where these open ecosystems come in.
Absolutely. And imagine someone coming on LinkedIn and verifying that I have worked at Yes Bank, I have worked at ICICI,
Absolutely.
rather than me alone telling that I have worked there. That's fantastic. And on that note, do we have time for another question? There is one here. Suresh talks about working in government versus working in private sector. What are some of the key challenges and learnings in both the worlds? If you have a minute or two, Suresh, quickly, if you would like to touch that, and we would then come to wrap.
I think some of the learnings are amazing on both sides. It's best to take the best of both worlds and converge it. Working in the government gives you the ability to see the scale at which you can make impact. And when at least in my experience, having worked with the Department of Post and then creating an organization like India Post Payments Bank, the scale of impact was amazing. You're talking about 250,000 plus workforce being aligned to provide last mile services, being institutionally held by one single institution. So that is amazing, that the scale with which you can create interventions at the last mile, as long as you have a very clear view of what you want to do and what you want to achieve. I think the sky is the limit.
Fantastic. And with that, we come to a wrap, Suresh. The opportunity you clearly highlighted is health, skilling, commerce, of course, benefits, insurance will come along. The requirement that you say is open mind, open network, and open willingness to contribute in public for larger public good. The challenges will remain the nimble footed, like minded people coming on the platform, and wishing all the very best to you and to Portia and team. Suresh, thank you so much
Thank you
for being
so
on
much.
the chat. And I'll hand over the mic to the organizers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anand.
Thank you, both of you. On behalf of IMAI and everyone present in the session, we would like to thank you for taking out the time today and having a wonderful conversation. We have had some interesting questions today, and thank you, Mr. Suresh and Mr. Anand, for taking those questions. It was pleasure interacting with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.